Okay, so in attempting to simplify deployment, because I am developing on a Mac and eventually I'm going to be deploying on a Linux operating system on DigitalOcean's droplets, I'm going to use Docker to simplify the way everything works. So in order to use Docker, you have to first make sure that you actually have it on your system. The scope of installing Docker is beyond the scope of what I'm going to do here. However, I am running Docker version 20. You're going to have to look up how to get it installed for your operating system, whatever it may be. I'm also using another thing called Docker Compose, which helps you to sort of orchestrate your Docker containers and have them start up all at the same time. It makes it much simpler to actually launch multiple containers simultaneously, which in this project, we are going to have 3 containers, one holding the back end, one holding the front end, and one holding the database. So the Docker Compose version that I'm using here is going to be 129. And again, that's another install. If you don't have it set up, then you don't actually need Docker Compose for this project, but if you want to follow it exactly as I'm doing it, then you will need it. Okay, so the simplest command for Docker is Docker processes list all, and you can see here that I have nothing is running. I'm going to go ahead now and try and change our application so that it will run inside Docker. All right. Now, normally, if I run yarn start, it's going to spin up here on port 3000. And what I want it to do is to spin up on port 3000 inside the Docker container and then map that port to our local port 3000. Okay, so I'm going to create a Docker file. Now, you may or may not know this, but yarn and npm both require node. And so I'm going to use the official node image, which at this time is 16 is the latest. You can always do this, but I recommend against it, only because technically your application can move out from under you if you don't know what's going on. So I'm going to go from node 16. And there are a couple of things we need to do. We need to create a directory for our application. Doesn't really matter where it is, because as of right now, I'm not going to make this video more complicated than necessary. And so I am going to be running it as root here, which is not fully recommended for production, but I don't want this Docker file to be overly complicated. So because of that, I'm going to leave that to you to find out how to run this under another user. Now, that said, this is root inside the Docker container. We will not be running it as root inside the DigitalOcean machine. It will have a dedicated user. So we need to make sure that we're in the correct path. Okay, this work here is very much like change direct, like CD in bash. Run allows you to run basically a bash command. It depends on the container you're in. So like here, I took from node 16, this gives me bash. Depending on the image that you chose, you may or may not have bash. It will use the default shell. Now, the thing that we want to do here is we are going to copy over our package.json, and we're going to copy it into here. So the copy command is going to take from my local folder here, okay? And this path is relative to the Docker file. So the Docker file is under front end, and the dot means the current directory, and package.json is right next to it. So I can copy it here, and the second one of these is inside the Docker container. Now, because I changed to the app directory, this will in fact become app package.json. I could do this just the same. I think it's more succinct and cleaner to just write it this way. So I'm going to copy package.json. I'm going to copy yarn lock. Okay, and then we're going to do it just like we do on our own system. We're going to have to install. So here we're going to yarn install. Now, in order to connect port 3000 to port 3000, we have to 3000 inside the machine, right? We would have to give it a directive to do that. That directive I'm going to do inside the Docker Compose file. But for now, I would like port 3000 to be exposed to anything that's running on this Docker network. Okay, so whenever Docker spins up containers, they all share a common network unless you, excuse me, unless you specifically specify otherwise. And the command that it should run when it first starts up is going to be yarn start, just like on our own machine. Remember, this will work because we are in the app directory. So there will be a package JSON which has that yarn start command. Okay, so with that, I can go ahead and build the container and it should run no problem. However, I am going to create another file now. I'm going to create the Docker Compose file and set that one up first. So I'm going to touch, and I don't want to be in front end for this. I'm going to touch Docker compose.yaml. And the reason why I don't want to be in the front end is because this file is going to have a bunch of different services in it. Okay, so we're going to start it at version 3, and then we're going to define our services. I'm going to name this one front end, and the image is going to come from, so we're going to build in front end. And I don't need to say anything else here only because I named my file Docker file. So by default, it's going to look for it there. Otherwise, I would have to create a build context and then I would have to list out which Docker file it is. Truth is, down the road, we're going to do that anyway, just because the production version of this Docker file is going to be different than the development one. But for now, we're only going to add things as we need them. So here I'm going to make a container name because I don't want Docker to just name it for me. I'm going to call this one to do front end. And now here I'm going to do my port mapping. I'm going to say ports are going to be, I want to map 3000 on my machine to 3000 on the container. And now we don't have any of the files. If we look at this here, we still need all of the files in our source directory. They're not there inside the machine, which means that nothing's going to work. So I need to add another key here. We'll say volumes. And here what I'm going to map is these are all of these paths, just like this one. They are relative to my current location here of Docker Compose. Remember, Docker Compose is in the root directory. So here I'm going to map the front end of public into app source public. I'm sorry, just app public, right? And the reason this is going to work is because we created this folder right here. This is where everything is going to go. And when I do this, this is going to create a folder called public inside app. And inside there, it's going to put everything in this folder here. Okay. And I need one more with my source contents. So front end source, we're going to map into app source. Okay. Now, if I did everything correctly, then this should just spin up without too much trouble. So I'm just going to go ahead, and the first time we do this, it's going to build the container. So I'm going to use Docker Compose up. And the reason why I don't have to specify the file is, again, because I named this Docker Compose.yaml. If you name your file differently, you will have to use an additional argument. So this is what I was saying before. It created a network because I didn't specify one. So it's going to go ahead and build out my front end now. It runs the yarn install, and normally I would skip over this, but I think it's important for you to have seen this at least once. So basically what this is doing is exactly what it would do on your system when you first do like the npx create React app or whatever. It's actually downloading everything inside the container itself. Right now, this stuff is Docker actually creating layers. And there we go. According to this, it is running inside localhost 3000. Now, again, this is on the Docker container itself, which means we cannot actually reach this directly. Okay. This is the IP address of the Docker container itself inside that network that Docker created for us. And our computer is automatically added to that network. So we are able to access it. And because I did this here, this ports 3000 to 3000, I should have a listening port at 3000 locally. If I close this tests, I can say netstat -antp tcp grep listen. And you can see here that we are actually listening on port 3000. And the reason is this line here. Without this, we would not be able to hear anything on 3000. So because that's working, I should simply be able to visit that port and everything would work. Now, this is from before. I'm going to close it and I'm going to go to localhost 3000 and it works. Okay, so now to prove that it's working, I'm going to go in here and I'm going to change the app a little bit, and we should be able to see a change in real time. So here, if I write to-dos and save this and then move over to Chrome, you can see that this automatically updated. So we have successfully Dockerized our front end. And I have a couple of comments about this. Right now, this is, everything is on both the local and the remote machines. Right now at this point, since we are not going to be running locally anymore, I can delete the node modules folder here. And it should make no difference at all. So I'm going to go ahead and do that now. I'm going to close, I hit Control-C to close the front end here. And it takes a second. I don't know why it always does though. And here I'm going to delete my node modules folder. All right, and if I run Docker compose up again, this time I'm going to give it the -D so it runs in the background and I can reuse this terminal. You'll notice this time it'll happen much more quickly because it doesn't have to rebuild it. Okay, I can say Docker compose, I'm sorry, I can say Docker PSA, and we can see here that the Fullstack to-dos deployed front end is running. And you'll recall that I told it to give it a container name of to-do front end, which means that I can access it that way through Docker. It's up. It was 8 seconds at the time I ran this command. You can see that the ports are mapped remote to local on TCP. And all of the ports are listening, right? And if I need to see the logs, I can use Docker compose logs. Okay, that will show me every service. And if I want to see just the ones for this one, I can use front end. And if I want to, I can follow the logs so that anything new that happens will happen, it'll update in real time. Okay, but the point here was that it is running now, even though I deleted my node modules folder. And if I refresh this page, I should not have any issues. I'm going to open up the dev tools just because there's nothing actually to see here right now. But here, if I refresh, we can see that everything is still okay. Right? Okay, so the front end is now Dockerized. And to stop it, I can do two things. I can Docker compose stop This will stop it. And if I say down, it will take it down and remove the container and remove the network. However, it will not remove the built-up image, which is still there. Now, I have a couple of images on this machine, so I'm going to show you this, but it might be a little bit messy. Yeah. So the main thing here is this one. This is our image now. You can see 4 minutes ago, right? Some of these other things were all from other demos, not to worry. But the main thing is that this image is here. And because this image is here, it will simply spin up again very quickly. If I do a PS now, you can see there's nothing in there, but I can Docker compose up again, and then fairly quickly it will start. So it won't need to build again unless you delete the image. And anytime you need to update the image itself, you'll need to rebuild it. So for example, if I add a new dependency, that obviously has to be installed inside the yarn install command. So the container would need to, the image would need to be rebuilt. Okay, so we have now Dockerized our container, and if I do a status, I want to add these, git add all, git commit -m Dockerize front end. And that concludes this video.